Black and Jill Foster here with another PB&J card class, and today I will be using one of our new creative dies called Bookmark to create a pair of bookmarks. And this is a week-long feature on the Penny Black blog, and I will be doing some stamping and watercoloring, and these are completely one-layer bookmarks, so they could easily be used in a book or they could be added to a card as the main focal element. So this is the bookmark we'll be making in today's video, and I've used Penny Black's transparent stamp Perfect Pairing along with the creative die bookmark and just a little bit of stamping with the stamp called Love Chapter. So to begin, I am just taking my stamp, and this is from that Perfect Pairing set, and I'm going to color onto this stamp using Tombow dual brush pens, and I've listed all of the exact colors at the end of the video. And the reason I'm using these pens is I want an ink that once it's stamped is water soluble, so I can blend that ink out, and it will just leave or give us less harsh of a look to the watercoloring than if we stamped it in black and then painted it in. Both ways look really pretty. This is just what I wanted to go for on this design, sort of a look of a no-line watercoloring. So I colored the flower petals with a sort of reddish magenta, the centers with yellow, the stems with green, and then some turquoise blue. I'm lightly misting that with water. And then I'm going to stamp this onto that Bookmark creative die, and that was cut from Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. And now I'm going to go in and do my first layer of blending. So I'm just using a watercolor brush and just plain water. And what I want to do is just spread that outline ink out onto the petal. And I'll go back and add additional shading. But this is just very lightly I don't want to use too much water or I'll completely lose those lines, but just spreading that out onto each petal. And I'll do that for both flowers. Now I'm going to use my Shimmers Aqua Hues watercolor paints, and I'm just going to add some shading to each of those petals. So I dried that ink that I had spread out from the stamping, and now I'm adding this next layer, and I'm working around the image, trying not to do any petals that are adjacent to each other or touching, so that that ink doesn't blend into both petals and they become one essentially. So I'm just working around the image and putting the darker color towards the bottom or any areas that are behind another petal. And as I do that, I also may pick up more of that outline ink that was stamped. And then those two colors will blend together. And I can go back and darken that up, drop in a little bit more paint. So I'm going to go ahead and dry that so I can move on to some of the other petals that may be touching those that I've already colored. And I just use my heat gun to do that. Now with these Shimmers paints, they come as a hard paint or like a hard cake-like surface in the container. And you just add water, let it sit for a minute or so, and then you can go ahead and paint with them. And they're a real creamy watercolor paint. If I get too much paint on a petal, what I do, and it's just off camera, is I will rinse off my brush in the water and then just sort of wipe it on my hand or on a paper towel, and then I can go back in and lift some of the paint into that brush. So right there I just did that. Made sure the brush wasn't very wet, and then I can really push that and move that down and keep some areas of light on each petal. I find this really relaxing, so a lot of times, like on this image, you could stamp this and have it ready just any time then during the week when you've got some extra time. You can go in and paint it, have your paints maybe set up. I often will set up a TV tray in the living room, and then just whenever I can sit down and do a little painting, it's ready to go. Here I'm just getting those flower centers using more of the Aqua Hues paints. And again, with those, I've also listed all of the exact colors at the end of the video. I'm dropping in a little bit darker color while that first color of yellow is still wet. That helps them blend together, and I can do a little bit additional blending with water and my brush. There you can see I'm just removing a little bit of that paint to add an area of highlight, and again doing that with the brush that is pretty dry. Now I'm ready to work on the vase. So just like the flowers, I'm just wetting that area. And now I'm going to drop in some more paint. And I'm starting with that thickest layer, darkest layer of paint on the edges. Then I go in with just water and work my way up to that, and then let the water naturally bleed that out. And I'll just put another lighter layer here and go back and add that darker layer towards the outside. And I'll get the bottom of the vase, essentially following just the same procedure, going back and forth and darkening color up until I'm happy with the look. I always like to start out light and then add more color. For me, that's just easier to do than if I go too dark right from the beginning. It's hard to lighten things up. Now this time, I really like this color of turquoise. This is the one that I used to stamp that vase. So that was the Tombow dual brush pen, and I just colored that onto the edges, and now I'm going in with some water to blend it. And then I didn't want that to look quite as green, so I'm just dropping in a little bit of the blue paint on top of that while it's still wet, just to change the color slightly. And you can see because that's wet, it just naturally bleeds into the rest of that portion of the image. I'll use the fine tip point of the dual brush pen to color in the stems. And now I'm ready to work on the ground and the background. And this is one of my favorite things I'm finding with watercoloring is adding that background in the sky. It's such a great opportunity to really add a lot more color to the image. And it's so easy to work around the image with watercolors as opposed to having to cut the image out and layer it on top of an inked background. You can just keep it all one layer, which is great for a bookmark. I'm working with a couple of colors here. So I put down the lighter color first and then dropped in that darker color and moving things around with water and my brush. Here I will paint a little bit around the flowers. And this is using the Cup of Joe Shimmers Aqua Hues paint. This is a really nice shadow color for round images. So I put the paint down closest to the image and then go back with water and blend it onto the rest of the background. For me, watercoloring is really a process, so I just try and just keep going with some forward motion. So even if I put something down and I don't 100% like it, I just keep going with it and know that I'll just put another layer on top of that. And that's kind of what happened for me with this background on this. I ended up not really caring for the yellow at the bottom with this brown at the top. There's just something about it that I didn't like, but I thought, well, I'll just get this down in the shading in the light and dark areas where I would want them and add a little bit darker down here on the yellow. But I just kept moving forward, and sometimes I feel like that's what I have to do with watercoloring is just it goes through sort of ugly phases, I guess you would call it. And then you could just keep adding and finally end up with something you're happy with. At least that's how it is for me. So in looking at those flowers, I wanted to have more contrast and shading. So I took the Tombow dual brush pen that I actually stamped them with and colored right onto the dry image. So that has all been dried with the heat gun. And then I'm going back and blending that with just water on my paintbrush. And I started with some of the petals that are in the back, and then I'll work more towards the others that are in the front. Again, I don't want to paint too much on petals that are adjacent to each other to avoid everything bleeding together. And I also wanted to brighten up those centers of the flowers, so I'm doing that by coloring directly with the marker and then blending it with water. And you can see I added that additional shading on the second flower as well. I pulled a little bit of this orange down here at the bottom. So again, colored with the marker and then blended out with the water. So now I'm going to take my Distress ink, and this is Vintage Photo, and I'm applying this with a Papericious ink blending tool and a foam pad on there. And this is where I just keep playing, and I do really love the look of the Distress inks on top of the watercolors. I've been doing that a lot lately. This is Wild Honey that I'm just applying on the bottom. And now I'm going to do a touch of stamping. This script is from the Penny Black Stamp Love Chapter, and I'm inking it up with Vintage Photo Distress ink. Not perfectly, but just dabbing that on top, and then I'm just stamp it just along the side here. And you really could stop at so many points in this bookmark, but I just kept going, and that is the fun for me sometimes, is just adding up layer upon layer. And this is some Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft Gesso. This is a very thin gesso, and once it dries, it's quite a bit, it's almost transparent in some areas if you apply it real thin or if you water it down. I'm just applying it starting off the edge of the bookmark and then working my way on just around that right-hand side in the bottom. Kind of just swiping the brush across. And I'll add a little bit there to balance things out. Again, like I said, that bottom portion was just too yellow for me, so I'm going back with that Cup of Joe color and adding that on the bottom. And what's fun is now that that gesso is there, that watercolor just lays down a little bit differently on top of the gesso, so it gives it even just a different look. So here's a look at the finished bookmark. And then I did a second bookmark using these same techniques, but a different stamp set from Penny Black, and this one is called Gentle Day. And I just stamped that onto the bookmark and painted it and distressed it just like I did the other. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to our channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, and our blog and website, and I'll have all of those linked down below in the description box. And here at the end of the video is a complete list of all the supplies used on our bookmark.